أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, praise and blessings of Almighty Allah be on the seal of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his companions, and all those that follow his footsteps from now until the day of recompense. Today, Allah's willing, we're going to continue from where we start in our course of understanding government economic policy making. If you could recall, in our previous session, we've discussed the output gap, and we've also talked about the potential GDP. We said that the potential GDP is that particular point where GDP is not growing too fast or GDP is not growing too slowly. We said if GDP is growing too fast, that's when you will be faced with an inflationary gap or an inflation problem, where if GDP is growing too slow, then you will be experiencing a crisis of what? Unemployment. In today's lesson, we're going to look at the business cycle and how the business cycle looks like, and why the business cycle is super important, especially as regards to knowing what's happening to the economy so as to be able to take the right kind of decision and make the right kind of policy. Without delay or waste too much of your time, I'll take you to my whiteboard and I'm going to show you how it looks like. Okay, great. This is my whiteboard and I'm going to show you something, just an imaginary economy and how it looks like. Let's say this is our GDP growth. This is our GDP growth here, and this is time. I'm going to put time here. Let's say the GDP starts something like this. Excuse my my drawing or my graph, and let me draw the potential GDP. For example, this is the potential GDP. This is the potential. This is the potential at which we expect our economy to grow. We expect our economy to grow, let's say, at this potential. And this is the business cycle. What you see here, this is the business cycle. From this business cycle, I'm going to indicate areas where the GDP is growing too fast. For example, in this area, we have the GDP is growing too fast. And in this area here, we have GDP growing too slow. In this area, GDP is growing too fast. In this place, it is going too slow. And here, GDP is growing too fast. So here, well, the GDP, whenever GDP is growing too fast, then you'll be faced with an inflation problem, as we mentioned. So inflation is going to rise. So it's going to inflation is going to go up at this level. But one good thing about this is that whenever inflation is going up, in this case of the business cycle, then you will come to notice that unemployment is drastically going down. So you will have unemployment down. This arrow will look down. You see, now we have unemployment down. So in this case, in this particular scenario, inflation will definitely go up, but unemployment will always go down. Now, the same thing with when you have a negative output gap, looking at the business cycle, a negative output gap here, we have a positive output gap, and then we have a negative output gap. So whenever there is a negative output gap, what tends to happen is unemployment is going to go up, and then inflation is going to go down. So in this case, for example, you have unemployment up, and then what will tend to go down is inflation. And this is what happened when you look at the business cycle. This is what surely happened in the business cycle. I'm going to take you to another data site, which is the World Bank data site, and have a look at how it's practically happened. I couldn't find all the data in one place so that I can put them all together, where we will see unemployment, inflation, and then the GDP growth. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at it, look at the data and see how unemployment has gone up over time and how inflation has gone down over time and how GDP has like relatively also goes up and down. What happened when GDP goes up? When GDP goes up above potential, that's when you experience a positive output gap and inflationary problem. And when GDP goes down, that's when you experience what is called recessionary gap, which is going to be an unemployment. So when you study the graphs or the charts carefully in any of the data indicating sites that I'm going to give you, you will see whenever there is fast growing, or whenever the economy is fast growing, then you will experience an inflationary gap, and you see that inflation will go up in the chart of inflation in that particular year, or unemployment goes down when the economy is growing too slowly. So this is what really this gap talks about, or this particular lesson talks about the business cycle and how the business cycle really looks like. Look, so let's go. Let's stop this. I've stopped the whiteboard. I'm going to share this World Bank graph. Okay, this is the World Bank map. I've taken Nigeria, for example. This is for Nigeria, and we have the country available. We've taken Nigeria, for instance, and then we've taken about 3 indicators. When you look here, we have 3 indicators. We have inflation, we have unemployment, we have the GDP here. So we put them all together, so you can use any one you like. For example, this is the GDP. In Nigeria, you can see it down here. This is the GDP. And let's look at in 2012, you can see GDP is a bit down in 2012. In this particular time, we expect unemployment to really go up. And here we expect like an inflation to set in, down, inflation, unemployment to set in, going up, inflation, down, unemployment. Like here, we go down, we see unemployment. We move up, we see what? An inflation, and then down, we see unemployment, like this up to 2001. So this is how you read this data. For example, let's look at the inflationary gap. So when you look at here, down 2000, when the business cycle moves up, here up, you see inflation going up. When it comes down, inflation is going down, inflation is going down. It means most probably we were faced with a recessionary gap in this period. Up, you see an unemployment, you see an inflation. Down, you see an unemployment problem. So this is how you read this data and be able to make some kind of necessary policy as regards to whether you're going to boost the economy, to inject the economy with more money, or you're going to like contract the economy by increasing maybe taxation or reducing government spending, or use any of the monetary tools in order to control inflation in the economy. So this is what really happened, and this is how we come to the end of today's lesson. We're going to continue with the aggregate demand and aggregate supply, or aggregate supply and aggregate demand, in our upcoming lesson. And I hope you've got a sense of what this circular flow diagram is and how it really gives you a clear picture of how the potential GDP works in relation to inflation whenever the GDP is growing above potential, and whenever the GDP is growing slower below potential GDP, where unemployment set in. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Thank you so much for coming, for joining us, and we really appreciate. Hope to see you in the next class. Allah's will.